I feel like I'm getting a lot of Job lately. Job Sunday, Job on Wednesday. I got Job in my sleep. Let's start at verse 1. I left off at verse 8. So let's just get the context. In Job chapter 3, starting in verse 1, it says, after this, Job opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. This is after 7 days of nothing being said. They haven't spoken to Job. Job hasn't spoken a word, and now all of a sudden he's going to vent. And Job spake and said, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. And instantly, with the rest of the Bible in hand, you see this is going to be more than just Job venting. This is going to be Job prophesying. And so we're going to have a lot of things here that are going to deal with. Everything this Bible is a picture of something in the future. Everything you're reading. If you read about the Exodus, that's a picture of it. When you read about Joshua bringing them into the land, it's a picture of what's going to happen in the future. Whether it's David or Solomon or whether it's Samuel, everything is a picture of that end. That which hath been shall be. And what we're going to find in Job, it's going to tell us about the end. And that's important because people read the Bible, they think Old Testament, I mean, it's got a good practical message. Why do the righteous suffer? I get that. But there's a lot more to it than that. It's being very prophetical. He said, let that day be darkness, verse 4. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. So this is a particular period of time that's going to be different than any other period of time in human history. And that's exactly what Matthew 24 tells you about it being great tribulation. There'll be nothing like it in the past or nothing like it in the future. He says, let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. It's also going to be indicative of the second advent because it's said to be a day of darkness and cloudiness and gloominess. And so this thing is playing right into that. It says, as for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined into the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. And then verse 7 kind of helps me with that because I'm like, what does he mean by that? I know it's like Job saying, I don't even want that part of my life counted. That's what he's saying. But what is it prophetically saying? And then verse 7 kind of helps me. It says, let that night be solitary. When you think about what happened to Job, it was very out of the ordinary. Wouldn't you say? I mean, if you read that in the paper this morning about somebody that lost exactly what Job lost, the way Job lost it, why, your jaw hit the ground. This is like that period of time he's talking about. It's going to be out of the ordinary. It's going to be a solitary. It's not really connected to the age before it. It's not even all that connected to the age after it. It is by itself, man. And the things that happen in there, many things that happened during that time frame have never happened before. And I wanted to, this is the only one I've got here tonight, or the only slide that I've got, and that is what I was talking about. You see how you've got, this is talking about Daniel's 70 weeks. How many of you understand Daniel's 70 weeks? Everybody? Anybody not understand Daniel's 70 weeks? Okay. Briefly, okay? Daniel is in captivity. He's praying. He wants God to show him what's going to happen. We've lost the kingdom. What's going to happen? So the Lord tells him and gives him a timeline. And he says 70 weeks. Now, if he was talking about 70 weeks of days, well, we'd have missed it. And so did they. But he said he's talking about 70 weeks of years. How you know that is because Jacob works for Rachel 1 week. He ends up working 2 weeks, actually, or almost 3 weeks. But when he says fulfill her week, he's talking about working for him for 7 years. That gives you the ability to interpret that 70 weeks as years. So 70 times 7, all right, 70 times 7 is 490, okay? 490 years. And he's telling Daniel, After 490 years, boom, the Messiah will be there. They'll anoint the most holy. That's what Daniel 9 is all about. So he says, well, when does it start? Because you got to have a starting for that timeline. He said, when you hear the commandment to go forth and rebuild and build Jerusalem, that's when it begins. It happens in Nehemiah chapter 2. It happens in the month Nisan, which is the first month. That's the month they have Passover in. And it's probably right at Passover because Nehemiah is all, he's poochy-lipped and sad, and it's because he's not there to celebrate the feast of coming out of Egypt. He's not in the land to celebrate it. He's in captivity. He's serving a pagan Gentile king, okay? So the thing begins, and that's what you have. He said, first he breaks it down into 3 separate parts. The first part is 7 weeks. He said 7 weeks to rebuild the city. It took him 49 years. And then he said, 62 weeks. So adding those together is 69 weeks. And he says, and after those 62 weeks shall the Messiah be cut off. Well, you see I got it up there 450? I'm just adding that number, that plus or minus 4 years thing, and it comes up to 450. I think they've got it 446 in some of them. But anyway, yeah, I think that's right. So I subtracted it, and then I added it back in. I hate calendars. But you know what happens 483 years, which is 69 weeks. 483 years later, guess what happens? And by the way, that's wrong underneath the cross there. It should say 33 AD. He began his ministry about 30. And it went 3.5 years, so he was 33. 483 years later, on Passover, you land at Calvary. Okay? The only thing is that the weeks didn't stop after 7 weeks. It didn't stop after 69 weeks because you're told what's going to happen. They're going to build the city, then the Messiah will be cut off. It kept going. One day after Jesus Christ dies, the 70th week begins, which is kind of a weird thing. He's actually raised from the dead in the 70th week of Daniel. There's something to it. I haven't figured all that stuff out, man. It about blows my mind. But so that thing begins, and we know it runs through the book of Acts for so long. Not very long, but for a little while. Not even a year, less than a year. And then all of a sudden something happens and everything changes. Everything changes. So, what Job is saying, if it had happened at the end of the 69th week, it wouldn't have been solitary. It would have been connected. But because it's prophetical, guess what? That period of time is sticking out there like a sore thumb. One of these days when it hits, wow, it's going to be nothing like this world's ever seen. And you know what it is? It's a continuation of that. It is the last week and what we call the tribulation period. Now, does that make sense now? Okay, so that's the reason why when he says, let that day be solitary. Now, day, year, week, it's kind of, the Bible uses all 3 to describe a period of time that is woeful and horrifying, and that week is. So, everybody good on that? I thought I might have lost some people on Sunday. So he says in verse 6, as for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined into the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Lo, let that night be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. And that just makes me think that, the bride's gone. The bride is gone. There's not a joyful noise in the land. Then verse 8, I gave you a bunch about that, about the time being shortened, and we talked about that last week. And then in verse 8 it says, let them curse it that curse the day who are ready to raise up their mourning. So I'm like scratching my head and I'm saying, okay, Doc, you better have something on this because I looked at it for a long time. If I read a verse over and over and over again, sometimes it'll hit me. My wife says because I don't understand English that I don't get these things. And sometimes I get them wrong just because I can't read English very well. But the verse it's a little difficult. But if I add a little prophetical flavor to it, it'll make some sense. Now, I think what Job is saying there, it appears Job is wishing some bad juju on them that are responsible for the curse. He said, let them curse it that curse the day. Well, somebody cursed his day. And he's wanting them to curse it like he is. If it's not, anybody got a better interpretation of that? Let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. Okay. Huh? All right, I thought somebody said something. I think Job wants them to hate that day as bad or worse than he does. Okay? So them in the verse are mourning over something. Okay. Well, I can only think of one thing in the Great Tribulation that the world, remember, you got to take this picture and move it into the future. There's only one thing that this world's going to mourn over, and that's they're going to mourn over the death of their global leader, aren't they? I mean, when the Antichrist is killed, he's down for 3 days. What do you think the world's going to do? They're going to mourn. And I'm going to give you some verses here, and some of it might be speculation on my part, but I'm thinking, man, I can see that happening. Zechariah 11:17. Zechariah 11:17 says, woe to the idle shepherd. Notice it says IDOL, the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. Well, Revelation chapter 13 tells you that this wound is unto death. He just doesn't lose a right arm and a right eye. And it's funny, through history there have been examples of this. You have Napoleon that always would, put his hand here. He had a bad right arm. Hitler, they say he had a bad right arm. He would always do this, something shaking. Ones that had a bad right eye. Give me one. Kaiser Wilhelm. Didn't he have a patch over his right eye? Moshe Dayan. Remember him? He was yes. He had a patch over his eye. There's some examples of it, but something about that right arm, there's quite a few of them like that. Anyway, Revelation 13:3 says, I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. Deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. I mean, they're having this big boo-hoo session, and all of a sudden, up he comes. Imagine if that happened now. Imagine if you knew somebody's killed, and then all of a sudden 3 days later, not like 3 hours later, 3 days later, they're cold stone dead, and then all of a sudden, bloop, up they come. Probably got them on the beer, and they're carrying it and they're mourning, singing dirges. I don't know what they'll be doing. But next thing you know, he sits up in his casket. Man, you talk about scaring some folks half to death. But the world's going to be mourning over it. Turn to Ezekiel chapter 24. Ezekiel 24. And I read this and I got to thinking about it. In verse 15, it says, also the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, behold, I take away from thee the desire of thine eye with a stroke. Yet neither shalt thou mourn nor weep, neither shall thy tears run down. Forbear to cry, make no mourning for the dead, bind the tire of thine head upon thee, and put on thy shoes upon thy feet, and cover not thy lips, and eat not the bread of men. And so I spake unto the people in the morning, and at even my wife died. And I did in the morning as I was commanded. There's a lot in there. But the Lord's telling him to do something, and he's going to tell you on down through there. We're going to read the rest of it here. In fact, I need to turn over there to Ezekiel 24. But there's he's going to be a sign. Ezekiel's going to be a sign. So I got to looking at that. And it kind of looks like what Job's talking about there, and talking about that mourning. And it says that it happens in a stroke. Now you got to understand something. When Antichrist first shows up, he doesn't show up in a red suit and a pitchfork. They don't know who he is. They think that he is from God. First, they probably believe he is a prophet. And toward the middle of that week, they start thinking he is the Messiah. So if the stroke was the stroke of a sword, Israel would lose everything at the stroke of that sword across his right eye and his right arm. Because you got to remember, they have a covenant with the Antichrist for 7 years. They've made a covenant. They have protection because he has favored them. That's how he's got in good with them. Their land and everything depends upon this thing working. In a stroke, it's gone. But I think there's something else here. If the stroke is the stroke of the sword across the Antichrist head, Israel will instantly suffer the loss of everything. Their false Messiah, their 7-year covenant, their protection as a nation. Ezekiel is to tell them not to mourn, but to put their shoes on. Get ready to run. And you know why I think they're having to get ready to run? Because I think it's a Jew that puts that sword across his right eye and his right arm. Suppose an Orthodox Jew recognizes him for who he is. Maybe because the image is being placed in the temple. Maybe it's being designed. Maybe it's in the works. And he knows about it and is responsible. Can you not just imagine the rage of who is actually going to stand up in the place of the Antichrist is going to be the devil himself. But imagine the rage of the world against Israel, to where the Gentiles storm in there and they take it for 42 months. Because he says, in a stroke, like the stroke of a sword. And the next thing that happens to Ezekiel is his wife dies. And he says, it's a sign. Well, Job loses his wife in the book of Job, but if you look at some of the other verses, here's what I've got down. I'm going to read it because it's better if I read it. Not only is Israel not to mourn the man of sin's death, but they're not even to mourn the death of their own family members. Why? They have no time for it. They must run. Because in 3 days, he is going to get up. And they had better be on the road by that time. Job 41, verse 25 and 26 says, and this is about Leviathan. Weird the way it's worded. It says, when he raiseth up himself, the mighty are afraid. By reason of the breakings, they purify themselves. They're doing this penance thing. They're whipping themselves and stuff. It says, the sword of him that layeth at him cannot hold. Let me read it again. The sword of him that layeth at him cannot hold. The spear, the dart, nor the habergeon. Somebody puts a sword against him, but he still comes up. In Matthew 24, verse 15 to 21, he says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whosoever readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. It says, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes, and woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Airports are closed. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Make sure I got all my verses here. Now let's look at Ezekiel, how this ends up. Verse 19. This is after his wife died. Let me make sure I'm in the right chapter here. Yep. It says, the people said unto me, wilt thou not tell us what these things are to us, that thou doest so? Then I answered them, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, speak unto the house of Israel, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will profane my sanctuary. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. The other verse in one of the other Gospels says, standing where it ought not. It's in the temple. It's being profaned. He said, the excellency of your strength, the desire of your eyes, and that which your soul pitieth, and your sons and your daughters whom ye have left shall fall by the sword. And ye shall do as I have done. Ye shall not cover your lips, nor eat the bread of men. And your tire shall be upon your heads, and your shoes upon your feet. Ye shall not mourn nor weep, but ye shall pine away for your iniquities, and mourn one toward another. Thus Ezekiel was unto you a sign. According to all that he hath done shall ye do, and when this cometh ye shall know that I am the Lord. Also, thou son of man, shall it not be in the day when I take from them their strength, the joy of their glory, the desire of their eyes? I mean, they lose it all. When that sword comes down, if it's a Jew, and you know it is, man, it's a Jew, they lose everything. It says, and that whereupon they set their minds, their sons and their daughters, that he that escapeth in that day shall come unto thee to cause thee to hear it with thine ears. In that day shall thy mouth be opened to him which is escaped, and thou shalt speak and be no more dumb, and thou shalt be a sign unto them, and they shall know that I am the Lord. The whole key of that thing is about who escapes and who doesn't. The women and children don't make it. If the women are with children, they don't make it. All right. So you got a lot out of that little verse. Well, yes.
So he sets that abomination of desolation like right away.
Yes.
That's like one of his first acts. He's like, all right, we're going after the Jews. By the way, I'm setting this up.
He helps them rebuild the temple, and you'll find that in Ezra chapter 6, I think. You'll find that it says the king of Assyria, which is a name for the Antichrist, is going to help them in rebuilding the temple. Well, of course he does. He wants to sit in it. You better believe he's going to help them rebuild it. And don't think, the fact that everything's happening pretty close together in the middle of the week there, it have to be in the works. I mean, unless he can just snap one and he's going to be like bewitched and wiggle his nose and all of a sudden there's an image. But methinks that they put this thing together. It's hooked to the computer system of this world. It's biomechanical. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to both speak and talk and compel folks to take the mark of the beast. Not the Antichrist, the image. So I would have to think that would be, what would you say? Okay, that's good. But you would think that as they're putting this thing together and rebuilding the temple area, that somebody's wise to what's going on. And don't think that the Jew that does that, I mean, this is what's supposed to happen, this is what's going to happen. I'm just trying to say, who would, unless he just hires somebody to do it, here, I want you to take this sword and whack me right upside my head as hard as you can, which is a possibility. Politicians, they'll do a lot of things. I don't know if they'll kill themselves, but this one doesn't stay down. But it's not him getting up. Verse 9, let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark. Let it look for light, but have none. Neither let it see the dawning of the day. Well, this is him kind of, saying that it's the darkest day of my life. And, he's kind of going on about it there. But there is a day that'll not have a dawn. Exodus chapter 10. Look at verse 21 to 23. And there's a picture of it here. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be, do you see that word? Felt. Darkness which may be felt. And Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. You are literally a captive. When the Bible talks about chains of darkness, oh yeah. You get into a place where there's no light at all, wherever you're at, that's where we'll find you when they turn on the lights, because you're not going to move. You can't. It says, neither rose any from his place for 3 days, but the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. In other words, they turn on the light, it light the room. You turn on a 100-watt bulb, the Egyptians did, and didn't give off any light at all. That's some darkness. Man, that's some stuff you can cut with a knife. But look at Job chapter 12, verse 25. There's going to be a time when the Lord's going to turn out the lights. And it's right there at the Advent. Job 12:25, they grope in the dark without light, and he maketh them to stagger like a drunken man. Job 12:25. Look at Joel chapter 2, verse 2. A day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and a strong, there hath not been ever the like, neither shall there be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. And he says a day of darkness. So one of the things you know about the Advent is that time when there's darkness over the whole land happens just before the Advent. They're probably got all their armies mustered. They're probably right there at Armageddon. They're all getting ready to just destroy everyone in Selah. They're coming up from the south. They're coming down from the north. They're coming in from all different directions. And all of a sudden, the lights go out. I don't know how long, but he said they're not going to be able to move to the right. If they're sitting there holding their horse, that's where they'll be 3 days later. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? You can't see nothing in front of you. You can't do anything. So there they are. And you say, what are they going to see? They're going to see a dawn, all right, but it's going to be the S-U-N of righteousness coming. That's what the light they're going to see. And when they see that one, boy, they're going to lose it. Talk about their knees knocking together. When you get so scared, your body has a reaction. And your legs can go right out from under you. You get that, oh no, that feeling of dread. And that's exactly what they're going to get. Joel 2:31 says, the sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon unto blood before the great and the terrible day of the Lord come. It's going to be terrifying. All right, verse 10. Continuation, because it shut not the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eyes. Job's upset because his mother had him. Do you know what a Jew will be upset about? That his wife had kids. That his mother bore children. That he had to experience what's going to happen. It's going to be beyond your imagination and mine. So like Job in his day, the children of Israel will suffer the loss of a multitude of children who will not make it to safety. Look at 1 Thessalonians 5:3. 1 Thessalonians 5:3. And this kind of supports what we've been talking about that solitary time, and also the fact that everything that the Jews have been completely hoodwinked. They have bought into the Antichrist because they've rejected the Lord's Christ. Okay? They rejected their Messiah 2,000 years ago. This fella comes along, offers to rebuild the temple, and such a deal. And they're shaking hands with him. They're loving it, man. He's got the Muslims at bay. He's got all the Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan at bay. And anybody who hates that Jew has been sidelined and marginalized. Why? He's pro-Jewish. So they think he's great. He's better than sliced bread. Why, you know what? He almost seems like he's the Messiah. It says there in 1 Thessalonians 5:3, for when they shall say, who do you think they are? It's the Jews. Peace and safety. They've made that concordant with them, that covenant. Everything's going their way. The temple's being rebuilt. Hey, guess what Jerusalem's going to be? It's going to be the capital of the world. Why? He's over there. Because he doesn't want Rome. He wants that mercy seat. So when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and what? And they shall not escape. That thing turns on a dime so quickly. 1 minute, everything's well, and the next minute, you can just imagine the announcement. They've killed him. Some radical Messianic Jew, I don't know, has killed him. And you can imagine the reaction. You know what the Lord says? Better get out of town. And you better get out quick. That's when that Jew realized. The Jew really realizes when they see that that's why I'm saying I don't know the time frame of this thing, but it looks like that idol is already there or present, or because something provokes what's going to happen. And then they're told to flee. If they didn't do it, why would they run? I think they do it. Because then the devil goes after them. He goes after them with everything he's got. He searches through the mountains for them. The only place he can't get to them is at Selah Petra, the rock city, because God is going to protect them there for 42 months. Any place else they're at, they're fleeing for their life, hiding where they can hide, going where they can go, all over the earth. And that's where comes in where you better watch how you treat them when they come knocking at your door. And you better take care of them the best you can, even if it costs you your life, because it's better than it costing your soul. Okay, then verse 11, why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? So Job continues to wish he'd never been born. I don't blame him, but there is one who will regret being born. Matthew 26 talks about, verse 24 and 25 says, the Son of Man goeth as it is written of him, but woe unto that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had not been born. Then Judas, which betrayed him, answered and said, Master, is it I? Always called him Master. You'll find that out. So whenever you hear somebody address him as Master, I'm not saying it's all the time, but you have to consider that it's Judas. You know that thing about the alabaster box, and it could have been done. Well, it's the one that calls him Master. And it was probably Judas that started that thing about, and the Bible says he was a thief and had the bag, and he just wanted the money. Master, is it I? And he said unto him, Thou hast said. You would say, You said it. Is it I? Master, is it I? You said it. I like what he says to him, What thou doest, do quickly. I mean, he even knows what he's going to do. He says, Get on up there and betray me. Get to it. We ain't got all day. We ain't got all night. Let's get this thing going. Now, Job states two ways in which he wished would have happened rather than what did happen. He said, Why died I not from the womb? That's a stillbirth. And notice that verse 16 supports that. It says, or as a hidden, untimely birth. And look at that passage there, or look at those 4 words, I had not been. As infants which never saw light. Then the other way he mentions there is, why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Well, you say, well, he's just talking about the same thing. It can't be. If he wasn't breathing when he came out of the belly, he's stillborn. If he came out of the belly and then gave up the ghost, he had to take a breath. Okay? So he has taken a breath, and that's where we'll look into some verses here in just a little bit. We're going to get down to it. But it's a difficult thing because of what's been preached about abortion, what's been preached about conception, and when the soul begins and when it doesn't. I'm just going to give you the verses. You make up your own mind. But I don't cloud myself with my feelings. I don't cloud myself with people's experience. The Word of God supersedes all that. And what it says to me, it says. And let's go on and read down through there, and we'll get back to it here in just a second. But verse 13 to 15 would apply when he's talking about that he died outside the womb. And notice it's quite different than being, he doesn't say, like he said in verse 16, I had not been. Okay? He's talking about being someplace. All right. He says, verse 12 says, why did the knees prevent me? Or why the breast that I should suck? In other words, why be born and nourished up to end up to have all this happen to you? Genesis 50 verse 3 says, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation, children also of Machor, the son of Manasseh, were brought up upon Joseph's knees. He's talking about being raised on somebody's knees, somebody that took care of him, somebody that fed him, probably his mama, as far as I can tell. He says, why did the knees prevent me? Or why did the knees prevent me? Or why the breast that I should suck? Why'd they do that? Why'd they take care of me? And then have all this happen? Probably every Jew in the tribulation will ask himself that question. I mean, listen, if I can't even imagine, I've read enough about the Holocaust. I've read enough books. I can't even imagine going through what they went through. It's almost like they were just sheep to the slaughter. Almost like they just had this dumb look on their face, like they didn't think that it was going to end as bad as they thought. You know, an animal, when it gets caught or something, it kind of gets, its eyes kind of glaze over, kind of knows what's coming. I almost feel that way for those Jews, man, because, wow, what they endured, what happened to them. I mean, you can't, if you got shoved tonight into a cattle car with 300 people and you're standing bolt upright for 3 days traveling, you tell me how you feel. Well, you got to go to the bathroom where you're standing. Children crying, old people fainting, people dying right there, and they're stuck right to them. And that was the least of it. That was the least of it. Somebody kept Job alive and nourished him, and he's angry. He's angry that they did. Why did the knees prevent me, or why the breast that I should suck? And then he says in verse 13, for now should I have lain still and been quiet. I should have slept, then had I been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves. 2 thoughts about that. One, rich people usually have a place that's out of the way. I mean, they own islands, or they own, 1,000 acres, in the middle of some prairie or something, They usually have desolate places. But then it becomes desolate. Everything ends up becoming a desolation in the scriptures. And I got a few verses for that if you like them. But he says, or with princes that had gold who filled their houses with silver. Those that, really, had a hold of life with gusto. You know what Job's saying? He says, I served the right master, but was rewarded as if I'd served the wrong one. That's what he's saying. And he's over there making sacrifice for his children just in case they sin. His character is impeccable. He served God. And look what he got. That's what he's telling you. He's mad. He's mad. He's so mad, he says, I wish I... And in a way, it's not cursing God, but boy, he sure is cursing that he was created, that he was born. We read something like this in Ecclesiastes 6:3. It says, if a man beget 100 children and live many years so that the days of his years be many, and his soul be not filled with good, and also that he have no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better than he. Now, Job didn't have 100, but he had 10. And he wasn't seeing good days. He was just seeing bad days from that point. So he says in verse 16, or as a hidden, untimely birth, I had not been as infants which never saw light. So let me give you the verses here. I've got a few of them about the breath of life. Okay? Now, I didn't say they weren't a physical life. I didn't say they didn't have a soul. But it looks like that you have to have that breath of life to become a living soul. In other words, it's still a potential life. It's a potential eternal life. But if it doesn't get that breath of life, it doesn't look like it's generated. What happens now? You need to be regenerated. Well, when were you generated? You say conception. If you want to believe that's fine. But I tell you one thing, when you come out of the womb, there's only one thing they want that baby to do. What is it? Breathe. Start crying. They'll get whack. Well, why are they doing that? That thing, and man became a living soul. Look what he says. Yeah. There you go. And the Bible knows the difference between the two. In Genesis 2:7, the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. You'll find that the word spirit, and that Greek word is pneuma. You get a pneumatic drill, pneumonia. I'm not saying it's oxygen. I don't know what it is, but I'm telling you that spirit is all around us. When you speak, there's spirit coming out. That's air. But there's something about that thing that when someone's born, they breathe in that first breath, it generates an eternal soul. Genesis 6:17, and behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven. Genesis 7:15, and they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. Genesis 7:22, look at this one. It says, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life. Huh. See, it didn't come through the amniotic fluid or through the umbilical cord. All in whose nostrils are the breath of life. Job 12, verse 9 and 10. Who knoweth not in all these that the hand of the Lord hath wrought this, in whose hand is the soul of every living thing and the breath of all mankind. Didn't, you say that, everybody thinks, he's pro-abortion. No, I'm not pro-abortion. I'm against abortion. I believe abortion's a sin. I believe it's wrong. Now, are you ready to kill every nurse and doctor and individual that had an abortion or is connected to abortion or that funded an abortion or was part, because it's first degree premeditated murder. If that's what you want to do, then you stand for it. You're not to have any mercy on a murderer. Paul said, if I've done anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. I'm just saying, stand your convictions. If you believe that, then you stand for that. Put them all to death. The nurse, the doctor, the one that funded it, well, that might get around to us. Now, I'm not saying God doesn't take a toll on that thing. I think that thing's so wrong. Dr. Ruckman said something about the deaths on the highway and the abortions are almost in equilibrium. How many people he's killing out there on the highways and byways. So maybe there's something to that. But there's one thing about abortion that always bothered me. It's not in there. You ever notice that? I mean, they talk about killing kids, after they're born, but it doesn't really talk about aborting them beforehand. It's just not really anything really there. That's because that's not the cause. You know what the cause is, right? It's a bunch of people fornicating. That's what the cause is. The result is, let's get rid of it. I mean, will we have any abortions of people? I mean, you said, well, there's probably some, it's very few. Yeah. So I don't know. There's things about it that I haven't really thought through about it, but there's some other things about it. I've always thought I would never go to an abortion march. I wouldn't. That's not the issue. Why would they talk about the issue? Why would they say, well, you're the one that was fornicating. you got pregnant. Why? Because God set that body up to do that. You're the one that stepped outside, got pregnant, and now you want to kill it. I ought to make a law to make you have it. Of course, plenty of people want to adopt babies. There's always someone that'll do that. But to have I don't think they should kill it. But I'll tell you what, as far as I can tell, that baby gets outside that womb, takes one breath, and you kill it, it's murder. Now, there are a lot of people tell me that. The problem is that you can miscarry and it's the hand of God. Yeah. Because of a fight, though. Yeah. That's true. And it's not murder. But then it says if death of the mother. Or the ability not to have children. Well, there's a verse in there that talks about if two men are fighting and the woman gets in it to save her husband, maybe he's getting a beat down. She grabs him by the genitals. She's in real trouble. There's a lot in that book about posterity. That's why I'm not in any way taking away from it. I just want to be right about it, what the scriptures say. I'm against abortion, but I'm against fornication. I think that's what we ought to be teaching. Quit your fornicating. Because all these people coming in, they're pregnant. How'd they get that way? It ought to be illegal. Absolutely, positively illegal. Okay, through with that. How many people are going to lose? We'll see. Well, Titus 3:5. I don't know why in the world I've got that at the end. Yeah, I talked about, that's the regeneration. That's the verse I want to give you there. Okay, I got to stop. I meant to get a little bit farther, but I had to go on my tangent. Has anybody got anything? I mean, what you got? No breath in them. Yep. That's Ezekiel 38? Yeah. 37. That's about the resurrection of Israel. He puts them together physically, but until he breathes in them that breath, come, O breath, and breathe on these bones that they may live. That's what it says. There's a lot to it. Okay. Sometimes you just, and if anybody taught me, Dr. Ruckman taught me that. You know, you can believe something, and then you go to this book, and then all of a sudden it doesn't line up with what you believe. Well, you know, you can tear it out. You can mark over it. You can go find you a version that'll match what you believe. Or you can say, well, Lord, looks like I got that wrong. Looks like there's something to it. And now if you can show me a bunch of verses that show me just the opposite, I'm definitely going to look at them. I just haven't found them yet. And the only thing I'm saying is I'm still against abortion. I'm against it. But I'm against fornication too. And nobody ever brings that up. Ever! That's the choice. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know, what it is it's an unnatural sin to want to kill the fruit of your own body. That's an unnatural sin. But they've got themselves in that situation because what have they done? They have violated what this book says about marriage. Now, there's probably a bunch of perverted individuals out there that even abort a child even though they're married. I guess like there's a possibility that 20% might be involved in that. That ought to be a criminal offense. I think that's horrible. If you can't handle children, then don't get married. Okay, I'm going to shut up. Unless somebody else wants to say something. Okay. They go straight to heaven anyway. Yeah. You know, the question got asked me, what would, I asked my wife that. I said, and we lost twins. And I said, would you rather think that you lost them and they're in glory or that they just never were? They just never have been. She goes, I think I'd be better just never have been than to know that I actually lost 2 living twins. I think it'd just be better just to know that they never were. Now, maybe you're different. And if you're fine, and that's fine. I don't argue with people. I'm a man. I ain't never gone through that. And there's an awful lot of miscarriages out there, man. I mean, heaven's going to be full.
I know people afraid, Lord, if they're not going to get saved, afraid just take them where they're born. I've heard that kind of stuff too. They just trust the Lord with it. They would much rather, lose a child they never knew than to have a kid grow up and die and go to hell.
One of the things that you see in these undeveloped countries, and folks living in a jungle or in living in abject poverty, is there's high infant mortality. But a lot of times that child is born and lives. Job's saying, he says, if I'd have kicked it right after I got out of the womb, I'd be sleeping with kings or resting with kings and princes. So, I think the worst thing is, to have a baby, and I'm not saying it ain't bad, I'm just saying just to have it, get attached to it, and then lose it. But then you've got a promise. So, and I know that doesn't take away what people have gone through. It can be horrible. I got to stop there. Anybody else got a comment?